Do you like the north of England? Would you like to spend a couple of days doing nothing but playing board games, eating great food, in the presence of fantastic people, some well-known faces from board game media, and potentially Matthew Jude smelling great? Then come to AireCon between the 13th to 15th of March next year. Tickets and more information are available on their website. That's aircon.co.uk and also in the links in the show notes. And now, on with the show.
$4.95. All you can eat. What's the word on the street?
Hello and welcome to another episode of We're Not Wizards. My name's Richard. I'll be your host for October. It's, you know what it's like, you spend the entire day, you're out and about, you really don't have time to grab yourself a snack, because if you grab yourself a snack, you're going to grab yourself a bar of chocolate, and then that'll fill you up, but at the same time you're going to feel bad about the fact that you're just eating junk yet again, and you're going to have to stuff that chocolate bar wrapper down the side of the car pocket where you keep the rest of the chocolate car wrapper, so you decide you're going to have to stop. But you're not just going to stop at any place, you're going to stop at a fabulous all-you-can-eat restaurant. And not just any restaurant, a restaurant that's potentially got spillages, a restaurant that has got shrimp that could be fabulous or dangerous. This is Scoffton. It's the all-you-can-eat restaurant buffet. And I'm speaking to Gavin Vance from the Vamoose Co. And he's going to tell us all about it. So welcome to the show, Gavin. No, it's I'm delighted you are here, because we've been kind of talking on and off for a little while, because as you might guess, I'm slightly far away from Gavin in the terms that Gavin is in Australia, and I am in Scotland, which means we're pretty much on the other side of the world. So that means there's a lot of wire, a lot of internet, and a lot of fingers crossed going on to make sure that this thing kind of stays together and doesn't fall apart. But we'll just have to see how we get on, won't we, sir?
That is true. And might I add, it's also a lot of very inconvenient time zone incompatibility. So it has taken a while to pull this together. And I'm sitting here enjoying my Sunday morning, or my Saturday morning, rather, while you enjoy your Friday evening.
It's just completely messed up. How is tomorrow so far? Is it okay?
It's quite good. It's sunny where I am, yes.
Oh. I thought it would always be sunny.
No. I live in Melbourne. It gets very rainy and very grey sometimes.
All right. Cool. Let's talk. I mean, as normal, we obviously need to say hello to everybody who's out there. So, hello to everybody who's out there. Thank you for joining us. The reason that we do this is quite simply because there are still not enough podcasts out there about tabletop and board games. I'm still on a hunt. Still can't find any, except for a couple of wonderful people out there, who you know who you are. But the other reason that we do this is because, sometimes you come across a game that's got a certain type of look and feel and quirkiness and kind of an interesting kind of take on something. And that's very much kind of Scoffton. And I wanted to kind of pick Gavin's brains just to find out a little bit kind of more about it, where his inspiration came from, where his ideas and everything like that. I mean, I guess the most important question was, do you remember as a small child the first time that you went to maybe a buffet restaurant?
Yeah, I probably do, actually. I I grew up in a city called Perth on the other side of Australia, and there used to be this kind of weird Scandinavian buffet called Miss Maud's, and there was a couple of them around town. And I think that might have been my first introduction to something like that. And it was, I suppose my abiding memories of that are the mounds of seafood that get piled up on beds of ice and resting on beds of iceberg lettuce and things like that. Yeah, I think that would probably be one of my first experiences with an all-you-can-eat restaurant.
And have you? Is that become one of your firm favourites? I mean, are you still like a buffet type man? Would you rather spend an entire Sunday kind of, eating out wherever you can? Or, have things changed? Have you refined your tastes in terms of what you do when you do like to go out for a meal?
I think my tastes have definitely refined. I think I'm happier to spend a little bit more money usually and, get something pretty decent. I did recently, it's going back to the beginning of the year, but I was on holiday in New Zealand and I was in a place called Rotorua, which is that place with all of the geothermal activity. Very interesting town. But I discovered in that town an all-you-can-eat restaurant called Valentine's, and I looked in the window and it was Scoffton come to life. They had the claw machine, they had everything, and I absolutely had to go and eat there. So that was my last all-you-can-eat experience at a place called Valentine's in New Zealand.
What was it like? Did it kind of live up to your? Did it live up to your game then? Were you kind of like going, "Oh, I've got this"? Did it actually maybe inspire you to make some mechanical changes to Scoffton when you were playing?
Not quite, but it did reaffirm my continued avoidance of establishments like Scoffton in the real world. Suffice to say, it was pretty odd, sort of butter chicken served with pizza. So that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think the general rule of thumb is if the restaurant bill is going to be less than how much it costs to park at the place, then you're probably better kind of and safer kind of going somewhere else.
That's
basically.
true. That's true. I must say though, Valentine's was, it wasn't cheap. It wasn't $4.95 the way Scoffton purports to be. No, it was a little more than that.
I don't know. It's been a long time. I think the last time I went to a kind of an all-you-eat buffet, I think it was kind of like there used to be a big, huge place, quite a distance as well from me. That was like a Chinese meal kind of buffet. And it had pretty much everything and anything, kind of sesame covered various items, things on skewers, tubs full of various sauces that some of them were mild and lovely and the other ones kind of, blew the hair out of your ears and your nose kind of thing. And, and it was always a case of I'm potentially running the kind of the food poisoning train here, but the stuff was incredibly Moorish because everything was battered.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
and it was these massive canisters of like kind of egg fried rice and stuff like that. And everybody so far is going, "Where's the board game chat?" I didn't realise I was listening to "We're Not Chefs," kind of thing. But in terms of you, I mean, obviously you growing up in Australia, what's the access to the hobby like? I mean, was it a different kind of journey? I mean, do you have as much exposure to kind of all of the games that, folks, they talk about Monopoly and Catan and Carcassonne and stuff like that? I mean, I take it you still see those kind of games, but is there such a big kind of board game hobby where you are as what you see normally, what you see other places?
Yeah, well, I suppose, we're all very globally connected, and we all get to see what each other like and all that sort of stuff. Now, I suppose the first thing along that point is board games in Australia are very expensive. They're very expensive to have shipped here, and we generally tend to pay a little more for things. We also don't balk at higher shipping prices, so the average Australian is used to paying quite a lot of money to have things shipped around. In terms of the hobby, obviously, I grew up in the 80s, grew up with, all the classics, Monopoly, Connect 4, Scrabble, all of that stuff. Didn't really think too much about board games as a teenager. Sort of mid-2000s or so, got introduced to Catan, which obviously is one of the classic ways to go. And, board games then became, a fixture in our kind of social life. And eventually Marcus, the other half of Vamoose and I, we had an idea to start designing a game around about 2007. So... that we've been doing it for a little while.
That's because I've still got my stupid head on when somebody says 1990. If they say to me that was like almost 30 years ago, I'm like, shut up. 1970 was 30 years ago. 1990 was like last week, kind of thing. So when somebody says to me the 80s, I'm like, yeah, I remember the 80s. I grew up in the 80s, kind of thing. I mean, when you were growing up in the 80s, one of the things that happened round about, it must have been about the early kind of 80s, 86, 87, 88, we started to get your Australian kind of soaps coming over.
Yes.
So everybody went daft over here for Neighbours. And then closely followed by that, there was like Home and Away as well. Were you aware of the time of how people in the UK were like pretty much skipping school in order to go and watch kind of like Kylie Minogue and Jason Donovan and everybody like that kind of live out life in Ramsay Street kind of thing?
Yeah, I had no idea it was so at epidemic levels, but I think later on we in Australia were quite well aware that shows like Neighbours had made quite a splash in the UK. So there was always that general awareness that a lot of people in the UK saw Australia through the prism of Ramsay Street.
It was either that or there was another show, it was Prisoner of Cell Block H.
Which
was another one.
Yeah, Prisoner was a classic,
Which was kind of like your late at night kind of, you knew you'd reached kind of rock bottom in terms of the choice on the telly, where you decided to flick through to Prisoner Cell Block H and you kept it on the channel and kind of kept watching. And there was a point, I think, where I ended up kind of watching it on a kind of a regular basis and starting to know the characters and starting to get invested in the characters. And then I knew I had to walk away. Right. It wasn't a good time. Gavin,
Prisoner is considered an absolute classic of Australian TV.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a good choice. Yeah. But incidentally, as far as Neighbours is concerned, it's it was filmed in the city where I live. You can get little bus tours that take you down to Ramsay Street and all that sort of stuff. Yes, so it's all there waiting for you should you decide to visit.
I was going to say, well, I wasn't a big into it, but I was like, because at the time it came on, it was basically round about the time after everybody had their evening meal. So it used to be the case you used to come on like about 5:30. So you get home from school, your mum or your dad would put your dinner on, and then you'd make sure everything was finished for like 25 to 6 because that's when it came on, and it was just absolutely ridiculous. It was such a kind of like a tour de force, and it's always kind of interesting seeing you grow up in the 80s. If you're like just going, it's just this crap that was on the telly. For some reason, everybody else kind of loves it everywhere else. In terms of, you mentioned you and Marcus.
Yeah.
kind of forging to go together. So how did you guys kind of meet then? Have you been friends for a while, or did you meet like kind of college, university type of thing? Or?
Yeah, well, look, we would have met in the early 2000s, so we would have been in our early 20s. And yeah, just met through, social scenes, I think, our partners and stuff. So we, we became friends, didn't think about board games for a long time. That all came a bit later. So,
were you both kind of like into board games, and then one of you confessed to the other that you like board games, and then you realised you both like board games, and then it kind of went from there?
Yeah,
basically?
well, it was definitely Marcus. I remember playing Settlers of Catan at Marcus's house, and seeing seeing that other side of board games probably for the first time, getting quite into it or being quite intrigued by it. And then shortly after, of course, I bought the next cliche in the journey towards board games, which was Carcassonne. So,
of course,
we got into that for a little while, and yeah, that's it's a pretty standard couple of first sort of games to be introduced to it all, but it works.
I mean, with you saying that was, it can be quite expensive to have, get games in, do you have a reasonable size collection yourself? Or are you generally aware of have you got quite a curated collection?
I myself don't have a large board game collection. I probably don't have the space for it. I probably don't have the desire to own lots of games. We tend to, gravitate around board game nights, or, we have a social circle of various different people who own various different games. So it's maybe a little more collectivized. Obviously, lots, if you go to conventions, there's always a games library, and that's the time you can try out games you don't own. So, yeah, I tend to, I'm not obsessed with collecting games or, displaying games or anything like that. We have a few games in the cupboard. I mean, it's probably more of a shelf of shame than a games cupboard, because there's a few unplayed items there. Having said that, I don't want to obsess over things. Occasionally I will see something shiny and new in a shop and think, I might need to have that, and I will put it in the cupboard and then look at it from time to time if I can't get it played. So, which I think everyone does.
What's the game?
I
think everybody's guilty of that. I mean, I'm currently, the microphone is resting on a copy of Through the Ages.
Oh, yes.
And, the number of times I've seen Paul Grogan introduce the first 10 minutes of his how to play video on Through the Ages.
Yes.
And
you haven't been able to
It's
commit.
absolutely ridiculous. It's quite, I think it's one of these games that's going to take like an afternoon with me and a couple of cups of coffee and just sitting down and having some kind of me time. Because I know you can play it single player, which is kind of attractive. And I think it's one of these things I don't think you could sit down with somebody opposite you and learn to play the 2-player game. I think you'd need to bring it to the table and actually have some knowledge and say, right, you need to do this, and then I need to do this, and then I need to do that, kind of thing. Otherwise it's lost. What about yourself? What's currently sitting on the shelf of shame that you'd like to get to the table?
Well, I'd probably have to say I bought Feudum when it was just finishing up its Kickstarter run, so that's going back a little while, and it was duly delivered to me, and I opened it up and had a great look at everything, and then put the lid back on and set it aside, and I would love to get it happening, get it to the table, but I just have found it quite intimidating. So I will definitely have to rectify that. it's probably more a case of really not delving into it. I mean, I think I looked up a setup video, and that itself was about 17 minutes long. So I kind of just thought, oh, this is something for a really, really rainy day. So I will have to rectify that.
What's kind of putting you off kind of getting it to the table then?
Oh, look, it's probably just, it's kind of tucked away and I just kind of overlook it. It's probably, a little bit of laziness, a little bit of intimidation. I'm definitely not described as any kind of rules lawyer or anything like that. So, I often find it a bit of a challenge to get a, more complicated game out and really, really go through things. So, look, it's something I will have to do at some point. It's certainly something I can improve upon.
I mean, in terms of like Kickstarter in general, are you then very, very picky about what you would consider backing because of like the potential shipping costs and stuff like that as well? Because I know that you guys always seem to get kind of mightily stung on terms of the shipping costs. I mean, everybody else is like, it's like $15, Australia and New Zealand, $175, and it's a tiny like box, and you seem to be subsidising shipping for kind of like everybody else. So in that in turn, does that kind of give you pause? Is it one of the deciding factors to say, well, actually, how much of the percentage of the game price am I going to have to pay for the shipping here?
Yeah, there's a real psychology around that, because I think in Australia, I mean, people use the internet to buy things all the time. It's not just board games, it's all kinds of things. And Australians will not worry too much. I mean, it's not great, but if the shipping costs the same amount as the item you're buying, people will generally, they'll just kind of accept it. It's not ideal, but we do understand it, and it is what it is. We're a population of 25 million, so we're not a massive market. We're far away. We're not really a central distribution hub for anything. So I think there's that psychology where, if a board game costs $20 and it's going to cost $20 to have it shipped, you just kind of, you do it. Translate that to somewhere like America, and it just doesn't go down well. So we're very, very conscious of that when attempting to design our own Kickstarter campaign, and I think you have to treat the shipping very delicately, because the shipping costs that you see on Kickstarters are never the actual shipping costs. That's, it's, you see some Kickstarters with, $6 worldwide shipping or something like that. That's not how much it costs. It's phenomenally more than that.
That's not happening.
Yeah. So you've got to work out, what's been subsidized, what's not. How much can you reasonably ask, people in America to pay for shipping, knowing that at a certain point they're just going to walk away? It's all a bit delicate in that regard. But as far as I'm concerned, when I see something on Kickstarter, if I want it, you've just got to pay the shipping. It's part of the deal.
Yeah. I mean, I know that, I do a lot of work with like the marketplaces like Amazon and eBay. And I know for a long time, Amazon just refused to go and kind of set up anything in Australia because they rely on having internal shipping being like spot on, that they can like make an awful lot of money out of the shipping cost and to ship stuff around Australia. I know that somebody said to me that it was, in some cases, it was cheaper to ship something from the UK to certain parts of Australia than it was to ship in Australia from one part of Australia to the other, just because of the route they had to take. It ended up kind of costing a small fortune. So I know that eBay Australia seems to be a thing and exist. Yes. I know that Amazon Australia
absolutely
is something that's still very, very much finding its feet.
Yeah. And Amazon in the last year or two had a bit of a hiccup with our rather foolish federal government insisting that they start to collect tax on behalf of the Australian government. So Amazon pulled out for a little while, and then they came back as Amazon Australia. So they are there, but yeah, they've had a couple of hurdles, and it's probably not so ingrained in the. I mean, from what I hear of our friends in the US, Amazon is it's like the grocery store. It's like, oh yeah, just pick it up from Amazon, and it arrives within hours. Whereas here, it's not quite so ingrained yet. It's more of a you get on it to buy something really special. Yeah.
What made you decide then to sit down with Marcus and kind of put a game together? I mean, you said it was like 2007, so I mean, it was over 10 years ago now.
Well,
so what was the kind of? I mean, what was the reasoning behind that?
Okay, so this story predates Scoffton. Around about 2007, I said to Marcus one day that there should be a game about beavers, and that the game should be called Damn Beavers. And we decided that we had to make this game. So we started cutting out bits of paper, and we got crafty, and we decided to make this game about beavers, and we had no idea what we were doing. But we created a tile laying, map building game about beaver colonies, where you are attempting to become the strongest beaver colony by foraging for resources in the wilds of Alaska or Canada. And basically you build up your beaver colony, and the years and seasons go by, and you get little baby beavers and stuff like that. So we created that game. It didn't have an ending for about 4 or 5 years.
Right, okay.
So it just kind of floundered. We didn't, real life got in the way. We had other things to do. So, then around about 2015, we revisited it. We realized how popular board games had become, and we wanted to see it published, basically. So we embarked on a real mission to try and gain the interest of a publisher for the game Damn Beavers, and that did not work. So we had to rethink everything. So then it became the notion of, well, we will need to publish it ourselves, and we will need to do that through Kickstarter, and we will need to learn how to do all of that. So rather than doing it with Damn Beavers, which is our very special baby in a sense, we decided to create a simpler game, something more easy to put together and manufacture and sort of all the rest of it. And that game eventually was Scoffton. That's how Scoffton came about. And that was a couple of years ago, so that's been about a 2-year development process. And in the meantime, Damn Beavers ultimately has kind of been shelved. We are concentrating on Scoffton, and it's become its own game. So it's become its own thing in its own right, and it has quite a few fans around the place who are looking forward to it being published. So it had a run on Kickstarter last year. It was ultimately unsuccessful. We had a lot of lessons learned, and we have applied them to the new campaign. So hopefully we have our old Kickstarter fans coming out of the woodwork and getting on board, along with some new ones. I mean, where did the inspiration come? For Scoffton. Right. This comes down to sort of how Marcus and I kind of work together. I often have silly ideas for games. He's a little bit more about the maths and kind of mechanics and putting things together, and together we collaborate to kind of make these things come alive. So Scoffton was, I think it was just another case of an idea a couple of years ago. I thought, a worker placement game in a buffet restaurant makes a lot of sense. You've got all these different places to go, you've got all these different tasks. The spark of the idea came. I knew immediately that it would be called Scoffton, as in Scofftown, and the game really started kind of writing itself, came together quite quickly, had a lot of different, the early iterations would have run for about 3 hours or so we immediately needed to cut a lot of time off the game. Initially, you had stuff like you had a hand of cards and you had money in your hand and, all this extra stuff that ultimately through the development process just needed to go and just needed to be simplified. So, yeah, there was a real process of rapidly trying to get the game pared down so it could be under an hour and, that it was just more instantly able to be picked up, basically, by people who wanted to play it.
Was the art style, was that a conscious decision to go for something which the style that you went for? Because it reminds me of kind of 1990s kind of cartoon type stuff, and I'm not talking about kind of like kids cartoons. I'm talking about the kind of the stuff you would see maybe in a Beavis and Butthead kind of backdrop, that kind of thing. Because one of the things that's striking about it, and I kind of tell everybody to have a look, on social media or whatever, with the pictures of the game themselves. You get it straight away. I mean, one of the things when you lay that board on the table is you get it straight away. It's not like a sci-fi theme. It doesn't need to be cleverer or more artistic or more inventive than what it already is. If you put that in front of anybody at all, people are going to look at that and go, "That's a buffet." There's not, and was that... was that a kind of a conscious decision not to kind of go overboard with the art? Because I see that an awful lot. People are bringing in graphics and vectors and shading and, stuff like that. And there's a lovely kind of charming purity to that art that itself is in Scoffton as well. It's very, very simplistic. Not that it looks cheap. It just really, really fits the theme. It really, really fits kind of what you were aiming for.
Yeah, Richard, you can say it looks cheap because it is cheap. So there is a story behind all of that as well. So yes, we acknowledge that there is a naivete behind the art of Scoffton, and that came about through several reasons. So when we started, obviously we started with a piece of cardboard torn from the side of the box, and we created a quick prototype in pencil. That quickly became something a little more solid. All through this process, Marcus was doing most of the art. He used to sort of write and draw cartoons in his college days. He hasn't done that for a long time, and he was certainly no user of Photoshop or graphical programs or anything like that. So he created a bunch of drawings for these prototypes. They gradually got better, and the prototype became quite nice and quite usable, and we really were wondering how to move forward with it when my wife Nan was having a look at it one day and said to us, this should be the game, you guys should just do it like this. And we laughed her out of the room, and then once we'd calmed down a little bit, we kind of thought, maybe that's not such a bad idea. Maybe we should go ahead like this. It would be risky and probably quite difficult, but it might actually work. And so that is why, the art of Scoffton is the way it is. It's basically a 1 to 2 year process of somebody, working out how to use Photoshop with guidance. We brought in a young friend of ours, a guy we met through the gaming scene called Jonathan Kalea, who is acting as the art director. So some of the vision for Scoffton, like the way the restaurant floor looks and all of that, has directly come from Jonathan's application of his skill set to things. So, it's been a collaborative effort in that regard. Having said all that, now when we launched last year, it had an alternate cover, which was my cover concept, which was a picture of the restaurant with a, police car out the front with its wheels stolen, and it was, really shabby. And so that piece of art didn't quite seem to connect with the intended audience through the last Kickstarter. So that was the one thing that we really have changed, is that it has a brand new cover done by Len Peralta in Cleveland. He has done some of the Munchkin stuff. He also has a great channel on YouTube about drawing as fast as he can. So he's a rapid illustrator. He does things really quickly. And his style suited exactly what we were after. It was, well executed with still giving you the shabbiness of the restaurant that is Scoffton. So, that was sort of the journey that the art has taken. And, we accept that it's divisive. Some people love it. Some people are not so keen on it. So that's just one of those things we have to accept.
I don't think it would have worked if you'd gone for something that looked realistic.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
It does not lend itself to that.
Yeah. I just don't think it would have worked as people, because you would had to make it really, really ultra realistic, and then it would have taken it down kind of like a serious track. And I think when you're coupled in with the rest of the art, because I guess we should maybe talk about. I mean, I've played I've played a couple of games of Scoffton now, and the kind of the art, once you play it, you kind of get the reason why the art has been the way that it is, because there's extra parts to it. Basically, the idea behind it is you're basically, it's almost like a set collection kind of game. You're using worker placement in order to collect the right kind of food, which will then allow you to fill up certain parts of your tummy or your stomach, which you can tie into the kind of the menu of the day in order to score certain amounts of points and shut off that certain part of your stomach and score it. And then you've got a separate little kind of dessert stomach, which I found absolutely hilarious when I first saw it, because I was like, yeah, that's definitely me. I've always got enough time to eat. Here I am chomping down on some pork belly, and then afterwards it's like, oh, I feel really full. And it's like, but I can definitely go ahead and I can definitely have some of this lovely caramel popcorn that I've left on the side for myself as well. So that kind of got like a definite kind of hee-haw from me when I was kind of like playing through it. But it's very, it's quite simple in terms of the mechanics, but there's quite a bit of strategy to it. I mean, when you're doing something where it's kind of fairly simple, I mean, you're saying, right, okay, you're taking what you would normally say your workers, but in the case it'd be a member of the family from like the table, you're placing them at a point in the buffet, and then based on, you've got little tiles which have various different food on them, and you take that back to your table, and then you eat it, and then it goes in your stomach. But you mentioned obviously before that you had money and stuff like that. Did you kind of strip it back as much as possible to make it flow as quickly as possible as well? Yeah,
absolutely. That was part of the process. So the first few iterations of Scoffton, as I said, would go for 2 to 3 hours. It was way too long for the depth of the game. We really wanted to create something that was going to play in an hour or under. A game that is enjoyable for adults on a games night, but can also be played by, kids around 10 years old with a bit of guidance. So that was sort of part of it as well, like a bit of a family game that is still fun to bring out with your adult friends on a Saturday night or something. There was just initially there were so many ideas. Because the very notion of an all-you-can-eat restaurant, there's a whole bunch of things that just are immediately obvious. I mean, The poison prawn was obvious. That was there right from the beginning. The claw machine was there right from the beginning.
The claw machine's brilliant.
Yeah, so it had to have a claw machine. It had to have the potential for leaving you very, very, very sick. And there was a lot of fine tuning that went on. And so at one point we had all of these cards that was the lost and found was a deck of cards that you could take some into your hand, and there was money in there. So we initially were, you could buy drinks. And then we thought, well, hang on, that doesn't really make sense. It clogs up the game. The deal with an all-you-can-eat restaurant is you pay one price, you walk in the door, and it's all yours. Yeah. So the idea of having money in the game very quickly fell by the wayside. We need to get rid of that, and the deck of cards that could be taken into your hand became the lost and found, which obviously is the 4 cards that sit at the side of the board that you can go and visit if you want to utilize those items. But it was important to strip all of that back and make the game flow and simplify things. So, just not having too many concepts flying around all at once.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I mean, I've given the briefest kind of version of kind of how the game plays. Do you want to give us a kind of a rundown of what you would do on a turn, Gavin?
Sure.
Just to let people kind of make people aware of it, because I kind of really liked the simplicity of what was available. But again, if you let everybody know kind of how you would play a round, basically.
Yeah, so a round basically takes place in 3 phases. Now, in your hand, you will have your 3 diners, and you will have 1 sneeze. Now, the sneeze doesn't always get used, so it's sort of an accessory that can be used occasionally if you want to reserve food items. But your 3 diners are the workers that you're going to use. Now, the first phase is called placement, which means in turn order, each player is going to go around the table and they're going to place one of their workers or diners at an action spot on the restaurant floor. This could be at the ice cream machine, it could be at the dessert bar, the salad bar. You could go to the claw machine, you can go to the main buffet, you might go to reception to make a complaint, or you may go to the lost and found to grab an item there. When everybody has done that, that means in a 4-player game, all 12 diners will be out doing something in the restaurant. At the end of that phase, you have management phase, which is the second phase, which is basically the management deck. The card on top will flip and that action will resolve. Management might come and give you bread. They might make you eat bread. They may clean up parts of the restaurant. Or there may be a food fight or something like that. So that action resolves. And then after that, it's time to activate. So once again, in turn order, players take it in turns to bring all of their diners back with the items that they've collected or the items that they need to action.
Yeah.
And the way it works is that the order in which you put your diners out is not the order in which you bring them back in. So you can make immediate tactical changes based on what other players are doing to either mitigate the effects of what they're doing or take advantage of what another player might be doing. So, a lot of attention needs to be given to what other people are doing, what you think they might be trying to create on their table and belly, in order to basically take advantage of any of their actions that bring about a fortuitous situation for you. You need to kind of keep on top of that. Yeah. So that's basically a round. So that keeps going until somebody fills all of the sections of their belly, and that then triggers the end game. So, the person with the most value for money will be termed the winner.
Because what you've got for the value for money is that's based on, you will decide at the beginning, you'll draw like a set menus, and what happens is menus give you value for money points based on combinations. So you might have, like, say, like a surf and turf menu. So that would be, some meat, plus the prawns, and then you would get so many for that. And that's the idea of why you fill up your belly in kind of certain order, because if you get that right, that helps with the scoring that you get as well. The sneezing mechanic is absolutely disgusting.
It is,
but
yes.
Also incredibly funny. And that basically allows you to prevent other people from basically picking up an item of food. So it's like a tactical type of thing that they can do. Was that an early addition? Did you have that in from the beginning, or was that something you brought in to say, well, how do we stop people from just going ahead and picking everything up that they need, kind of thing?
That was quite early. So basically, it's like a little reserve token, so you can place it on a dish out on the restaurant floor, and nobody else may touch that dish because it's got your sneeze on it. The risk behind that is that management may come and clean it up. So the longer you leave it out there, the higher the risk of it getting removed. So you have to go and then retrieve the dish and take it back to your table and eat it. So, but it was quite an early concept that, somehow came floating through my brain and manifested itself in that way, as these things do.
Imagine that. How are you going to stop people from stealing it? It's like, well, I don't know, you block them or you can sneeze on them. And then it's like, you could ask the question, has Gavin potentially deliberately sneezed on somebody else's food in order to take it away from them? I mean, I have questions, queries and posers about that kind of situation. The other thing that you also have is you've also got the spillages as well.
Yes, there are spills.
And again, they're there to kind of take up spaces as well. To, almost kind of prevents people from jumping into spaces too.
That's right. The restaurant becomes progressively messier as the rounds go on. So spills can be triggered by things like food fights, or there are a couple of lost and found cards that trigger spills, and basically people will place a spill in an area that they want to block off. And then you can't really get there unless you use items from the lost and found, such as the non-slip shoes. They will allow you to step onto a spill and take the item that you are looking for.
What's the feedback been like in terms of playtesting, and how easy is it to kind of get the game playtested? Have you been kind of like having to go around different groups in the local area to get people kind of looking at it and playtesting it and stuff like that?
Yeah, we have done a lot of that. So playtesting has taken place over 18 months or so. It's it hasn't really been playtested in the last 6 to 12 months because it's a finished game. It's ready to go. I personally run a little games testing night that operates, infrequently, but when it's required. I've got a bunch of people who enjoy playing prototype games. We go to conventions that occur around the place, and people are always happy to sit down and play. And then there are, some games groups, etc., that we might go along to and get people to try out the game if they so want to. And the feedback has always been really, really good. It's people are often attracted to the colour palette of Scoffton. They see it on the table and they think, oh, what's that? And a lot of people find it quite charming and a slightly unusual take on board game design. So that's kind of it's a little bit quirky, I suppose, and some people really respond to that quite well, and they get the joke immediately. They see the art's a little bit shonky. They can see that the restaurant itself must be a little bit shonky, and the whole thing kind of works thematically. So that level of feedback has been really good. The one thing I was surprised about when we ran a Kickstarter for Scoffton late last year, some of the feedback we got from that was, that it seemed to me to indicate that there were a bunch of people out there who really, they didn't like humour in board games, or they didn't appreciate humour in board games, and that was quite puzzling to me. I thought it was very odd that, there were people quite earnestly asking, why is the art so crappy, and, the people that just didn't seem to really be able to put it together, that, the whole thing was a bit quirky and a bit of a funny take on an all-you-can-eat restaurant. So, yeah, I found that kind of puzzling, because I think there's a lot of room for humour in board games.
Yeah. Yeah, it was kind of strange, because I was speaking to Ian McAllister from the Giant Brain.
Oh, yes.
He did a write-up on it.
He did indeed.
And I just said, and he got it kind of straight away. And I was, because I asked him how he found it after reading it, and he was like, yeah, I mean, it was a quirky, very simple to play, easily accessible kind of worker placement game that didn't overstay its welcome. And he says, I didn't find anything kind of offensive. He says, and I loved the kind of the theme.
Yeah.
And I think that's what I got. Yeah, I think humour's a funny thing in games.
Yeah.
I think it's like if it's kind of like maybe being produced by the people that are playing it, I think people are okay with that. I think if it's something where you're trying to almost like, where it's not in your face, and it's kind of like a subtle humour, because the way I saw Scoffton was, I have been in this type of buffet situation, so that's why I find it amusing, kind of thing. That's why I got it, because I've been there, basically. I think was why I kind of liked the look of it and liked how it looked.
Yeah, everyone has. Yeah, well, when I say humour, I'm not talking Cards Against Humanity humour. I'm talking a little more subtle. But yeah, when you bring up Ian McAllister, he was great. His little game group were great, because he did say to me up front, we don't really like worker placement games. That's not really our bag. We don't really play too many of them. And I sent him Scoffton, and the response was great. So yeah, that was a little win for us. Might I add, I believe you two have the only 2 copies of Scoffton that would be in Scotland. So
we do. I have the other one, and the presentation, because you've 3D printed most, if not all, of the materials, including the kind of the little board in the box. So I've been playing about with it, and yeah, I mean it's been there's an awful lot of work that's gone into the components.
Yeah. Well, look,
and it's a ready kind of game. It's a ready game to kind of go, basically.
Yeah, it was very important for me to be able to present a prototype that was going to be very, very close to the vision of what the final game would look like. So we embarked on a arduous task of creating 30 sets of what became the Scoffton prototype. And I can honestly say I'll never do that again, because it was about 2,500 little tiny square tokens to cut out by hand. Lots and lots and lots of work. But yeah, I mean, the result was great. Like the game, people would pick the game up and it looks like a finished game. So it was worthwhile. It was just a very, very big job. So yeah. I've got about 3 of them left, still deciding where they're to go to. So,
what's it been like in terms of the marketing? I mean, with you being kind of where you are, I'm guessing that you getting to the States for any of the conventions there, or getting across to Europe or the UK is just, it's not going to happen unless you're 6 numbers coming up on the lottery, I guess.
Absolutely,
But,
yeah.
Has it been a different approach with the marketing for yourself then?
Yeah, well, obviously it's a more low key approach. We don't have big games conventions happening all the time the way that the United States does. The UK maybe not so much, but definitely more. I mean, we have a few conventions. We are launching Scoffton next Friday in conjunction with PAX. So PAX has an event in Melbourne every year, and that's a huge convention. We attended, we've been there the last few years. Last year was really great for us. We were part of what's called the Tabletop Game Designers Australia booth, which meant we had a little area to be able to set Scoffton up and attract people into the booth and talk about it and get people excited. And we found that people noticed the game. They were quite into checking it out, and that was really good for us. So we are hoping to replicate that again this year.
How much is a all-you-can-eat buffet ticket going to be then? What's going to be the price on the kind of the Kickstarter itself?
Okay, Scoffton it's $48 Australian. So I can't quite do the conversion on that right now for price in pounds.
Let's do a live one. Let's see. Let's actually, coming live and direct. Let's do a currencies direct.
Currency conversion.
Check.
I do know that
Here we go.
I do know that the game shipped to the US is about $40 US.
All right. Okay. It's £26.
£26. Okay. And how does that stack up with tabletop games in the UK? That's ridiculously inexpensive. Okay, yeah, I see.
That is ridiculously inexpensive because I've seen what's in the box and you get lots and lots of components. I've seen games with far less components being more money than that.
Okay.
So,
well, that's a good thing,
that's just the exchange rate.
On today, we'll see how it goes next week, shall we?
Yeah, exactly. We might need to have a chat off podcast about conversion rates.
We may do. Yes, look.
Yeah, so that's good. So cool.
Yeah,
so
I've spent
48 Australian dollars. Yeah.
Yeah, 48 Australian dollars. I've spent much time with spreadsheets trying to work all of this out to try to make sure that everyone has a reasonable level of happiness about the price of Scoffton. We did have to have a $2 price rise on last year's Kickstarter just because of the exchange rates have changed. We put a bit more money into the artwork, so we just had to make a bit of an adjustment there. But we still think it's quite reasonable. Yeah.
Yes, it is. And is that going to be a ticket shipping's going to be charged after the campaign then? Is that what you're thinking about doing?
No, shipping will be charged during the campaign. I'm not a big fan of going back to people and asking them for money later on after they've made a purchase, and I just don't think it's a good system. You get that email 6 months afterwards with someone saying, "Oh, can you give us some more money to ship your game?" And you kind of like, what game even is that? So, I like to get it out of the way.
No. If people are interested in finding out more about yourselves, about the game, where can we find you on the interweb nets, Gavin?
Well, one point of contact is vamoosco.com. That is VAMOOSECO.com. That's the main Vamoosco website. You can also look Scoffton up on places like Board Game Geek. You can find me on Twitter at @the_prototyper. And you can find Marcus on Twitter, and he is at Spudhole. That's Marcus's handle.
I'm not going to ask.
Yeah, and various other. There's a little Scoffton YouTube channel, which has a little bit of material on it. We'll be releasing a bit more video content over the next week or so. There's a great playthrough video about to go up, which it has a full game of Scoffton played through it. Somebody else did one quite
last couple of months. Is it Meeple University?
Oh, Meeple University, yeah. So Meeple University, there's a few videos from Meeple University up. They live in the same city as us, so they are friends of ours, and we have had them create a few videos, which they have a how to play. They have a couple of interviews and things like that. They're always hanging around conventions and stuff. We bump into them all the time.
Oh, good.
And we also have up our sleeves the Scoffton jingle. So we have created a TV-style commercial that advertises the restaurant, and that is about to be available. And that obviously makes up a fair bit of the Kickstarter video component. So we're really looking forward to launching that and unleashing that on the world. I'm not too sure how many other board games have jingles. I mean, there's a few out there, but this is something we have worked very hard on, and we're looking forward to seeing the effects that it has.
I'm sure it'll be fantastic. And we will make sure that we put all of the links in the show notes.
Yes, sure.
So that we've got notes to show. And we'll make sure that we put, we'll put a link to Ian's review.
Oh, great. Yep.
In there as well, just so everybody can kind of check his thoughts on it. As I say, I've played it a couple of times. I've found it very enjoyable indeed, basically, to be honest.
Oh, good.
Hand on my heart and stuff like that.
Excellent. I appreciate it.
And I can only wish you the best of luck for kind of when it launches, kind of next week again. If you want to keep an eye on what we are up to, it's quite simple. Go to the internet webs and search for We Are Not Wizards, and you'll find us on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and we've got our blog, which is wearenotwizards.blogspot.com, and we've got our normal website, and you can pick us up on all the podcast catchers of choice that are either using the word pod or the word cast, or using neither, like Player FM. Or you can go to Apple Podcasts and you can drop us a subscription, you can drop us a rating, you can drop us a review. You can tell people about us, which is always really, really helpful. If you've listened along tonight and you like what you've heard, tell somebody else. That would be fantastic. Even if you don't like them, just tell them anyway. Scream it at bus stops. That'd be fantastic. As I say, if you do like what you hear, consider give us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts. As we say as normal, don't give us 10 stars because it makes us big-headed. But don't give us 1 star because it makes us cry into our soup. Give us something in the middle, like a 5, because it's average. And just like an all-you-can-eat buffet, we're just a little bit average. But the person who's not been average today is rather wonderful. They're rather fantastic. He's a man who's an early riser who's going to go off and get himself a bacon sandwich somewhere. It's the wonderful, the fantastic Mr. Gavin Vance. Thank you, sir, for coming on.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, Richard. It's been very enjoyable, and I look forward to hearing all about this. And thank you very much for having me all the way over there in Scotland.
You're very, very welcome indeed. There is only 2 more things to do. The first thing is to remember there were many things, but we're not wizards. Are we wizards, Gavin?
I am most definitely not a wizard. In fact, that's quite a solid fact. Yep.
Superb. And the other thing is to say goodbye. So it's a goodbye from Gavin. Say goodbye, Gavin.
Goodbye, everybody. Thank you for having me.
And it's a goodbye from me. Remember, stay safe, roll 6s, make something awful, and check out Scoffton. Treat yourself. You want that donut. You want that ice cream. You want to use that claw machine. You want to see what happens when you sneeze on somebody else's food. But until the next time, goodbye.
A wizard is never late. nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he means to.